Welcome to my channel. Tonight's stories are based on paranormal events. I want to send a special thanks and shout out to Nefarium for this collab. I had so much fun filming this, and I left a link to his channel in the description bar below. You should really head over to his page and check out his content. He has really good stories on his page. I think you will really enjoy it. Also, this video took me longer than expected to get up because I'm fairly new to the whole YouTube thing and I have to learn how to be a little more consistent and time management, but I don't want to get too much into that. But I want to thank you guys for stopping by. I really do appreciate your love and support. You know, my subscribers, I love all of you guys. You know, if you want to see more content like this, leave me a comment so I could, you know, hear what you guys have to say. You know, like, subscribe, stick around and see what else I have in store. So, without talking too much, I hope you guys are tucked in somewhere warm tonight. Make sure you have all the lights out in the house and enjoy. Love you.
My mom used to live in the mountains as a kid. She would carry some drinkable water with her sisters back to the house as a daily chore. They usually take a dirt road beside a forest that's usually rustling without a single sign of wind. One of those days, a baby cried loudly in the deep greenery of the forest as they passed by. They just ignored it since they're one of the reasons some of the people living there always goes missing. They always use familiar noises to lure people like psst. I would know because one time I almost followed the cries of a baby at almost midnight. Good thing my older relative caught me before going into the trees. There's a story at my old high school that one of the wings of the buildings caught on fire one time and a firefighter died in the efforts to stop it. Since then, there have been sightings of his ghost. One time after school, doing hood rat shit with my friends, went into the area and all the lights were off. We weren't doing anything wrong, we were just basically playing hide and go seek and exploring. Well then suddenly, there's this person standing right in front of me. Didn't say anything, and I don't remember them walking up. They were suddenly just there. I am immediately terrified that we are in trouble. Run out, and my friends see and follow. It wasn't until after the event we realized that they only ran because I ran. They didn't see anyone. When I tried to describe who I saw, I couldn't. It was just a silhouette. That's when the story came back to me and I realized that I saw an old ghost. Never believed in ghosts before that, but now you can't just convince me otherwise. I was at a friend's house watching his dog and it was late at night. He bought the house from a guy after his wife died. She was bedridden and died in the house. We always had stuff like weird noises at times, and one time a drumstick fell off the shelf and it was lodged in there without any way for it to fall out. Anyway, so I'm over there and I'm watching TV on the couch and I catch something out of the corner of my eye. I turn and I actually physically see an orange orb float through the air. It loops around a couple of times, then it comes right up to my eye and then vanishes. I kinda laughed to myself because I didn't know what else to do, and I laid back on the couch when the edge of the couch my head was at came a couple of inches off the floor and slammed down onto the ground. I tried to tell myself later it was because I was tired and I was half asleep, but I do know I was fully awake. I lived in my childhood home until I was 20. Lived there with my roommates for a year as well. It's always been an active home, but definitely got more active once roommates moved in. Lots of different energies pushed together under one roof can definitely do that. One night, my boyfriend had a friend over to play video games. I was hanging out with my best friend / roommate. My boyfriend and his friend decided to go get some food around midnight. My friend and I stayed home. None of our other roommates were home. We were sitting at the kitchen counter, right next to the front door. We heard voices approaching the door after about an hour after my boyfriend being gone. The motion sensor light came on outside as well. It sounded like two male voices talking to each other. Eventually, the light went out, but the voices continued. We were confused why they hadn't come in yet. All while making some jokes, my friend proceeded to open the door and check who it was. Nobody was there. No cars were outside. Confused, it took us a few minutes to understand what was happening. We walked around the perimeter of the house. Nobody. Called my boyfriend. He was a 10-minute drive away. This was when we really started to think about it. We've known that there were spirits in the house, but not much else. We always joked that it was two male energies. One was playful and a trickster, and the other is scarier and likes to scare us. We once had a conversation about how the spirits could be female because none of us felt a female presence. Only male. At one point, we even assumed it might be one spirit, but now we know it's two male spirits because we heard them with our own ears. After many years of continuously writing up, but always forgetting to post, and then constantly losing my draft on my old laptop and phone, I finally managed to write down and share my account of the one and only time I have seen a ghost. This is my own true personal experience. I have always considered myself to be a calm, rational, and logical person, and I was always on the fence when it came to the paranormal. That is, until this day. This happened about 4 years ago, in August 2016. It's autumn time, and I'm driving to go and pick up my girlfriend, to go get some food. I will never forget glancing down at the clock to notice that the time was 8:30 p.m., and so the sun began to set. I go, and I've picked her up, but for some unknown reason though, I stupidly decide to take a shortcut and drive down a notoriously haunted road. Background info. This road is situated exactly between a huge cemetery. Many of my family are buried there, and a crematorium. I personally know 2 people that have died in a car crash around here. However, I've actually been down this road many times over the years, and I've never experienced anything even remotely paranormal myself until now. Now bear in mind, these two adjoined long stretches of roads used to be national speed limit roads, which means that in the UK, you're legal to drive up to speeds of 60 miles per hour. The limits to these particular roads have been changed and lowered since. Therefore, that should make you aware that I'm completely focused, alert, and I have my wits about me. Also, bear in mind this. These roads have absolutely no streetlights. The only form of lights are the cat's eyes that's built into the road, which reflects car lights so it reflects and shows the path. Oh, also another thing to note is that there are no sidewalks on this road. This is important for later. I'm cautiously driving at a high speed and am fully aware of my surroundings. We continue moving along and quickly end up reaching over the halfway of these 2 connected roads. This is a point where the trees surrounding on each side of the road kind of form a sort of tunnel. This only managed to add to the eeriness. As I'm driving along, I suddenly notice a distant figure up ahead, about 50 to 100 yards. He just sort of happened to be there from seemingly nowhere. So, as any sane driver would do when they see a person standing in the middle of the road, I instinctively took my foot off the gas, until I realized something. There are no sidewalks for pedestrians to walk on, and it's a 60-mile-per-hour road. My mind instantly began going into overload, and I started to go through a series of questions in my head. An absolute flood of emotions and sense of dread started to creep in, but I quickly reminded myself that I need to remain calm, driving on this very dangerous, unlit road. As I get closer to within less than 50 yards, I can finally make out a bit more detail. It's now that my emotions really start to run wild. My hands are shaking. Tears are rolling down my face, and I'm beginning to sweat profusely. All because I'm gradually starting to come to terms with what is in front of me, and have been unsuccessful in quickly trying to debunk this whole scenario in my head. I'm almost in disbelief of what I'm seeing in front of me. I see a brown-robed figure, no face, no feet. He's there in the middle of the road, just hovering. Then, almost as if he sensed that I was coming closer. At this point, I'm now less than 10 yards within distance of hitting him. He literally drifts to the side of the road into some nearby bushes and completely vanishes. I barely maintained my composure long enough to finish driving to the end of the road, where I managed to park up. I was speechless. My face had gone so pale I was drenched in sweat with tears coming out of my eyes. I sat there for a full 10 minutes, just trying my hardest to debunk and comprehend what I'd just seen, but the truth was that there was no streetlights or other lights that could have somehow caused a visual misinterpretation. There was no pass for a random person to enter this section of the road. No other sort of interference from other external sources, and no headlamps from any cars coming in the opposite direction whatsoever. I eventually, after what seemed like an eternity, began processing in my mind that the only thing I could come up with is what I just had witnessed. A full-body apparition of a brown-robed Benedictine monk. And you know what's the funniest thing about all this was? My girlfriend was there for the whole journey, but she had her head down and was looking at her mobile phone the whole time. Although later on, she actually did end up having her own experience after seeing a different kind of apparition another time that I went down the same road again. This whole experience ended up having such an impact on me that I've been doing some background research into the area. Sometime later on, I managed to discover two very specific details about the area. One, an actual monastery used to exist there back in the 12th to the 13th century. 2, I found a website dedicated to my city, just a generic website about the history of the city. However, I managed to find a thread. It was about ghost locations and around it. And eventually, after browsing through some 12 pages within it, I eventually find a comment by someone who also mentioned seeing a monk.
This story is inspired by true events. When I was a kid, I loved scaring my little sister and all of our friends. I would come up with the wildest stories to tell whenever we had a sleepover. The one I told the most was called Old Man Mack. It was about a guy in his late 80s who lived alone on top of a hill in this dark, gloomy, creepy-looking mansion. Every night, Old Man Mack would walk down the hill to a railroad not far from his house holding a rusty old lantern. And he would begin walking up and down the tracks searching for his wife who had been missing for over 15 years. He kept his lantern lit by trapping the souls of anyone who crossed his path. You see, he blamed everyone for his wife's disappearance. I creeped everyone out with this story, and I was 11 years old when I came up with this. Anyways, at this time, my mother, sister, and I were living up north in a big city. My aunt convinced my mother to move down south so that my sister and I could get to know my cousin better. My sister and I went first because my mother had to stay behind and clear out our house. We moved in with my aunt, uncle, and cousin. She was slightly older than me. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was the railroad tracks in the back of the house. It must have been about 20 feet or so away. This was the South, so that was very common, but I've never seen railroad tracks so close to our house before, and at ground level. One day, we were playing in the backyard. There was a gate separating the house from the tracks. I don't know why I was so fascinated by this, but I was. I asked my cousin if she's ever seen anything strange happen on the tracks. She just looked at me with a puzzled look and said, "Strange? No." My sister and I shared a room with my cousin. There were 2 queen-size beds on opposite sides of the room, and in the middle was a glass patio door that led to the backyard. One night, as we were getting ready for bed, I started telling my cousin my old Man Mack story. She was very skeptical and said she didn't believe in anything like that. I mean, I did make the story up, but she was the only one that I couldn't convince about my story being true. I think it's because she was a few years older than me. All of my friends back home were either my age or younger, so they were easy to convince. When we went to bed that night, I was woken up in the middle of the night by heavy rains and winds due to the fact that it was hurricane season. The wind was so strong that it blew the patio doors open. My cousin jumped out of bed to close them, but stopped and was paralyzed in place when she saw muddy footprints that were made by large boots. They tracked from the backyard, walking through our room and walking towards the door, entering the rest of the house. She immediately turned the lights on. "Whose boots are these?" As she asked that, my aunt walked into the room and was horrified. She called my uncle in the room, and when he saw the muddy boot marks walking through our room, he immediately ran to get his shotgun and frantically started searching in and around the house. But there was no one there. My aunt was pissed at my cousin because she told her repeatedly in the past to make sure that the patio doors are always locked before going to bed. Once the house was secured and everyone settled back down for bed, my cousin and I stayed awake talking. "What if that was old Man Mack?" she asked me. I made that story up to scare people. Old Man Mack doesn't really exist. We ended up dozing off, and the next thing I remember, my cousin was shaking me awake. "Shh. There's someone standing in the backyard on the railroad tracks." I didn't believe her at first. I thought she was just trying to get me back for scaring her earlier with my story. But when I saw the look on her face, I knew she wasn't joking. I slowly crawled out of bed, trying not to make too much noise. We quietly tiptoed over to the patio doors. My cousin was behind me, gripping my arm so tight that she left nail marks. We ducked down, and I carefully moved the sheer curtain to the side and peeped through the corner of the door. And there I saw it. It was a figure of a man who looked eerily similar to the guy I described in my old Man Mack story. He stood about 6 feet tall, with grayish pale skin, and in his hand was a dimly lit lantern. He stood there staring in our direction. In that instant, all the breath left from my body, and I still have no words to describe the terror I felt. Suddenly, the figure started pointing in our direction and started gliding towards the house. Now screaming and tripping over each other, we ran into my aunt and uncle's room. They jumped up as we hysterically told them that there was a guy standing in the backyard. My uncle jumped up to check it out, but the figure had gone. That night, my aunt and uncle switched rooms with us. The next morning, I woke up and I overheard my aunt and my uncle talking in the kitchen. My aunt seemed very upset, and my uncle was trying to calm her down. I did overhear her telling him that she saw a ghost of a woman walking past the bedroom door last night. I didn't imagine it. I saw a lady and I heard her cry out, "Help me." My uncle didn't believe anything of the supernatural. He was a very logical guy. Well, a few days passed with no incidents. But one night, my aunt ran into the room with us and locked the door. I heard my uncle yelling furiously from the living room. "You are not welcomed here. Get out of my house. This is a blessed house. You are not welcome in my home. Leave this house immediately." That next morning, my aunt called the pastor and asked him to come over to bless the house. While we were in prayer, I felt this intense feeling like someone was staring at me. I lifted my head and saw a figure emerge from behind the pastor. It was the same guy that my cousin and I saw the other night. He stood there motionless, with a faint grin on his face. I was petrified. I squeezed my eyes closed and continued praying. Then, a strong smell of perfume passed through the living room and faded away. That's when the pastor said, "It's done." I opened my eyes and the figure was gone. Later that night, we were watching a movie. My cousin turned to stare at me before saying, "I guess your old Man Mack story was true after all." We haven't experienced anything after that. But now looking back, I'm trying to figure out if I believed in my story so much that it manifested, or was I just super sensitive to the supernatural that an entity was speaking to me from the grave? I don't know, but I haven't told this story until now. And I would like to apologize for any paranormal events that you may experience as a result of listening to the story. This was the story told to me by my grandmother. She told me one day on her way home from work, she got off the bus and a man got off the bus with her. She said it was pretty late, so there was barely anyone around. When she crossed the street, the guy also crossed the street. When she turned the corner, he turned the same corner. Every time she stopped walking, the guy would also stop walking. Now scared, she started walking faster, but heard the guy's footsteps behind her picking up speed to keep up. She eventually turned around to ask the guy why he was following her, and she said his head fell off into his hands. I've been experiencing sleep paralysis a lot lately. It's become so frequent that it's starting to scare me. One night, I set up a video recorder to tape myself sleeping. The next morning, when I watched back the video, I seen me lying there paralyzed. My bathroom door slowly opened as a dark shadow emerged from behind the door. It creeped over to the front of my bed and stood there for a while. Then it hovered over my body. I didn't see this as I was lying there in sleep paralysis, but my videotape did catch it.